This is part 6 of my Orangina build for the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. If you're not familiar with it or you want to see my build from the start, the link is up there. Today is all about fretting, leveling, crowning, and polishing. I'm also going to be using my newly made fret press, so it should be interesting. Join me. Let's build a guitar. Hi, I'm Yoav and this is the Electric Luthier. In the 6th part of my Orangina build, there are 24 fanned frets to fret. That's a lot of work. Let's jump right in. So my neck is now shaped, radiused, sanded, and even dyed. The original roll of fret wire I ordered had shipping issues, and I ordered these pre-cut jumbos instead. They actually have their tangs cut as if for a binded neck, but they're not in the correct length, so I don't get it. If anyone can enlighten me on the point here, I'll be happy to know. They also come in what seems to be a 10-inch or 9.5-inch radius, and for a 16-inch radius I probably would have bent it to 12 inches or so, but this should be fine. This is not stainless steel and looks flexible enough. Besides, the difference is really minor if you look at it. To prepare the frets for fretting, there are 2 steps. The first is to clean the slots and make sure they are deep enough after all the sanding and radiusing and gluing. You can use this designated jagged knife, especially good with binding, to get into those little corners. Although apparently it's hard to focus on. I'm just going to run my slotting saw after I mark the 2mm depth to match the fret tang's depth. You can see by the amount of sawdust that there's actually very little material removed, and it's mostly just running through all the slots and giving them some love. Unless you really rushed through the slotting and need more serious work. The very last step I encourage you, especially as a new builder, not to skip is the chamfer of the slots. This is done with a small triangular file I run on the lips of the slots to give them both a kind of 45-degree angle. It's actually more of a 60-30, but never mind. Aside from making the insertion for the frets easier, it'll also minimize any chipping when a fret needs to be removed. In an ideal world, that would happen only after years of playing, but in my experience as a newbie, this may actually happen in the next hour. Fretting is not an exact science, and it takes time to get your technique down, especially if you're like me and try a different one each time. Time to cut the frets. I start from the heel and just eyeball the length with a little extra and cut. I do need to make sure I take those tangless tips into account. Aside from not being too stingy with the length, the one thing to pay attention to is to cut the frets from the sides and not top to bottom. Otherwise, you might twist the tang in the process and make your fretting life miserable. Once I've cut all the frets, I take a nice long piece of masking tape and put them all aside. If you don't do that, or some other means of holding them, they will start scattering when you start hammering. Now, I usually prefer using carpenter's glue and not super glue, wherever possible, because of its more forgiving nature. The same applies for fretting, and if you've seen any of my previous builds, I use Titebond. However, many builders swear by it, so I feel the need to give it a shot. I'm also giving a first test run to my fret press, and if you want to see how I built it, there's a link here and in the description. I'm using a very thin nozzle to get the super glue right in the slots in an attempt to minimize any mess, which is a pain to clean. There's another way to use super glue, and that is by wicking it in from the sides after all the fretting is done. I think it was about after half the frets when I decided to switch to this method. This is also about the stage where I got the hang of the press. I still need to hammer the frets about halfway in for it to be pressed straight down and not to get skewed. I sometimes also need to press twice to even the pressure on the middle and the side. This is also due to the awkward and inconsistent back of the neck being flat at the heel, then half rounded, then radiused, and at the end a slanted headstock. The fanned frets, which may have seemed problematic, did not actually make much of a difference for the press, so that's good news. After a bit of back and forth and a couple of rogue frets which had to be replaced, they're all pressed and looking good. The real test is the leveling. A perfect fret job will require hardly any leveling at all. Well, we'll see. If you noticed, I made a point of cutting the first few tips as I went along. The cutter's head is a bit too wide for the spacing of the last few frets, so I need to remember to cut after each one. Anyway, I cut the rest. Back to the super glue. I now put a drop or two on the tip of every fret, on both sides. The thin super glue type is the one you want for this. Remember, the purpose of the glue here is not to hold the frets, although it's a welcome side effect. The glue is here to fill the little gaps around the tangs and therefore solidify the fretboard and improve sustain as well. This is why carpenter's glue will work just as well, although it may require a longer drying time. At this point, the tips are pointy and need some serious filing. The standard tool for this is a fret beveling file, which is a block that has a file embedded at either 90 degrees or 36 degrees, or both. These can be plastic or wood like mine. If you want a more personal touch, you can also use a standard flat file and go fret by fret, but I prefer saving this type of attention to a later finer stage. I run the block both flat and at an angle until I feel the edge getting flat and the side angled enough at the top. Depending how close your fret cutters cut to the frets, this can take a bit of work and is really rough in the beginning when the tips are really pointy and uneven. When it feels smoother and you start touching the wood, it's time to switch to a sanding beam or something similar. I have a couple of beams with various grits, so I can start with a 180 and then switch to 240 and then 400. You want the side of the fretboard to be the smoothest part of the guitar. Of course, I repeat the same process on the other side. Notice that I put a little masking tape on the tips of the fretboard where the nut will be, so I don't bevel them with a couple of long strokes. Before I start the whole leveling and crowning process, I like to cover it for protection. I've seen many builders do it at a later stage or not at all, but after slipping a time or two with a fat marker, I decided that sooner is better than later. I like using the thin tape and just doubling wherever necessary, or even tripling at the first few frets. This also saves me a lot of cutting. I start by marking all the frets uniformly and lightly running the leveling beam to assess my fretting. right off the bat, I can see that the higher frets will require a bit more attention. On the other hand, the lower octave looks pretty darn good. To get a more precise picture of what my leveling needs to look like, I whip out the wonderful fret rocker and start going fret by fret. I check each fret in 3 positions and mark the taller ones with a different color. I can tell that fret 21 and maybe 20 are way too high, and if it wasn't super glued, I might have even considered trying to hammer it in or even replace it. On the other hand, we'll get a good example of extreme leveling and crowning, so it's not all bad. There are a couple of more in the 20s area that will be leveled. I am proud to say that the lower half of the fretboard is almost perfect, which goes to show that my press is actually pretty good after a bit of a learning curve. I start working the higher frets with a leveling beam using a 180 grit. After a few gentler strokes, I check again with the rocker and see that there's a long way to go. I switch to a flat file. This one doesn't have a handle, so I can run it like a beam. I tape the 10th and the 9th frets so my beam and files will not touch anything below that, or above that, depends how you look at it. After some more filing, I went back to the beam, and after checking it with the rocker, also with the 240 and 400 grits. After all that needs leveling has been leveled, I turn to recrowning, or if you're not familiar, rounding the tops of the frets I've just flattened when leveling. The 20th and 21st frets are a good example of how flat they can get. Luckily, these are jumbos, so there's enough meat to work with. I've tried a few fret crowning files, the ones with the concave file, and I always go back to a little triangular file which had one edge smoothed. I mark the top of it with the blue masking tape so I don't need to look at which side to use. I should really get a real one from Crimson or Stumac and see what all the fuss is about. But so far this one's doing a pretty good job. I find that with the triangular one I can see what I'm doing better. After marking the frets again, I just want to file the sides to leave a very thin mark right in the middle of the fret. I play with the angle a little, but I'm not really trying to round it, just get the top edge of the fret right. After that, every tip also gets rounded on both the sides and the edge of the 36-degree angle. The 3rd fret also has some height issues, and although not recommended, I give it a personal sanding session. I just really don't want to have to crown all those even frets around it. The danger is that I overdo it and then need to level all the neighbors again. But I check and sand until it's good. I then go and finish all the tips on the other side. It's more comfortable for me to do it this way, but you can do one fret at a time or whatever. After the file, I want to go over everything with the 400 or 600 grit paper to just remove some of the scratches and soften the tips that the file may have left. This is done very lightly, and at the top part should not really remove more than the marker itself. The frets should now look even and smooth, but a little dull. It's time for polishing. There are a few ways to polish, and I usually do it in 2 stages. I'll start with a set of freight erasers, which come at 180, 400, and 1000 grit. The 180, which I start with, seems to smooth it a little and definitely removes any marker residue. I follow it with the 400, which doesn't really make a huge difference, and I follow that again with the 1000, and it does seem to have an accumulative effect, but I'm not really impressed. Maybe it's the quality of these erasers, but it doesn't look like they do a much better job than the steel wool I used in the past. In fact, I'll grab a piece of 4-0 steel wool and give it a go. It looks just as good, if not even a little better. I'm not even going to compare the price. I think I have a lifetime supply of steel wool for the one pack of erasers. These are from Baroque, and they actually have another set that has grits going up to 2000, so maybe that'll improve things a bit more. I'll link it below just in case you want to check it out. Anyway, I'll give it a once over with the steel wool. At this point, the frets are relatively smooth, but we do want to give it an extra shine so it'll look great, but more importantly, for smoother playing and bending. I use this metal polish paste and rub it on the frets. Buffing can be done manually with some dry cloth, with a buffing wheel if you have one, or with one of these little Dremel wheels, which I'm using with a drill attachment. I go fret by fret and really try to get to all the sides and angles. It's time for the great reveal. I remove the masking tape. I'll use a clean cloth or a lintless shop towel to clean all the remaining polish. If necessary, I'll clean any glue residue with spirit or turpentine. That's it. We now have a fretted and polished neck ready for finishing. Next part will be all about finishing and painting, and we'll see how close to assembly I'll get. If you found this helpful or entertaining, please comment, like, and subscribe. I've linked all the tools and parts I used here, and if you do end up buying anything, I may actually get a small commission and will be thankful. There are also links to guitar building articles on my website, theelectricluthier.com, and lots more videos on my channel, like these ones. So what are you waiting for? Go ahead, build a guitar.